Okay, we are recording. My name is Greg Flanagan, and I run a business called Power Onward Masterminds and Coaching. This is a series, what you're looking at right now is what we call Power Interviews. It's a series of 8 solo agents that are sharing with us tips and hacks on how to get started and not lose as much money as they did when they started. Brian knows what I'm talking about. So this is number 6 in our interview series, and this is Brian Modansky. Brian's been in the business for how many years now, Brian?
Got my license in 06.
06, so 14 years, going on 15 years. That's a long time in this business. That's a real long time. If you make it past 18 months, you're a veteran, right? So Brian Modansky works with us at our office. And Brian, why don't you share us your, give me an elevator, two-minute elevator, where you've been, what's your journey like, and where do you look forward, where you going?
So I kind of fell into the niche that ended up kind of dominating the first couple of years of my business. I got my license, basically floundered around for about, I don't know, the first 10 months, first month, year. I just happened to be out with someone and they said, you want to come work at our office? We list a lot of bank-owned REOs. I wasn't even familiar with the term REO at the time. I went there the next day, interviewed with the broker. He had a assignment down in Daufusky Island, which was a fun first assignment. The guy who brought me in ended up not coming to the office, and essentially I ended up taking the reins and just running with it. So I worked at Gibbs Realty for the first 7 years of my career. Sold probably over 300 REO properties just with Gibbs. And then I moved around a little bit. I worked for Marshall Walker for about a year and a half, and then Johnson & Wilson out of Somerville, and about a year in the Mount Pleasant KW office, which was great, but Vince just kept in my ear, and I live over in Somerville, so switched over from the Mount Pleasant office to West Ashley a couple months ago.
Great. And you said you've done over 300 REO properties.
I've done over 500. 300 were just
500. Wow. Okay, that's big time for 14 years on the job. Tell us, and I think what everybody here wants to know, and please use the chat. You got questions, use the chat. And if you have anything specific, one of the things we want to deal with today, Brian, is how do you get started in the business? What are the pitfalls? How can you save me time and money, right? And how do we shorten that curve to get into the real estate, the REO business? And also answer the question, what does REO stand for? And then we'll go into how can a buyer agent perform better when they do go for a foreclosure home. Okay, so let's start with, tell me, how do I get into this business?
Well, it's not an easy business to get into. So the first part is easy. Once you've done the basics, it gets a little bit more difficult from that point. And so the basics are most of the different asset management companies, there's about 5 or 6 major platforms that they basically assign their properties through and assign tasks through. So one of them is called Equator, one of them is ResNet, there's Pyramid, Acceleris. So Fannie Mae uses Equator. HUD has their own one, but basically you have to sign up for these platforms, and they don't come for free. I think ResNet, my last renewal was $700 for the year. Pyramid platform was free up until this last month. So you can get a basic membership for free, but to be up on the top of like a zip code, which is what an asset manager is going to be searching, you're not going to be found on a basic search.
Let me ask you a question, because you're using nomenclature that you and I are very familiar with, and maybe a few other agents. What's an asset manager? What's a platform?
Okay.
Okay. So let's go back to square one. What is an asset manager? Tell me how a foreclosure comes to light from the time that the judge deems it foreclosed.
Okay, so basically what happens is when a foreclosure start happens, that's usually when I start looking at properties. And I'll show you guys some links I'll share some screens and kind of run you through some things real quick in a bit. But there's foreclosure hearings, and you can go online. All the counties have their foreclosure hearings and also their foreclosure sale information online. It's public information. So there's a lot of time and research that goes into finding what properties are, what banks have them. If you're going to be getting into this business, that's where I would start looking first, to create maybe like a hot list of which banks you think the properties are coming through. But just because they list the bank on the foreclosure docs doesn't mean that's the one that's actually going to be managing the foreclosure or managing the property after the foreclosure is completed. What'll happen is once the property has gone through the foreclosure sale, an asset manager or a production manager at an asset management company that has this property is going to assign it to an agent, typically within about 48 hours of the foreclosure sale. So we, as an agent that's signed up with the company, with an asset management company, if I have a relationship, or maybe I'm next up in their rotation, or however it works within that company, I'll get an email saying I've been signed a new property. And there's a task timeline of having to go out to the property immediately. We'll go into that further down the line. But basically, an asset manager is someone who manages properties for an asset management company. And
How do I get in touch with an asset manager? How do I find these things? Where do I go? What's the resource?
Well, so what I was getting before was creating a hot list. Every area, not every asset management company covers every area. What's an asset manager here in Charleston, that covers Charleston may not cover Charlotte. So you want to find out which banks and asset management companies have the properties, because why waste your time trying to go after connections that aren't going to have properties to assign to you? So, the first thing I would do is try to, figure out where the properties are coming from so I know who to contact. The easiest ways, one is, I've been fortunate in that I've been in the business long enough that I've gone to several conferences. There's an REO conference called 5 Star. There's another one called REOMAC. There's also the NRBA conference. And that's where you kind of get into networking with other agents that sell REOs. And it's good to just have people to bounce things off of, find connections. I don't have a connection at Face Servicing or Fannie Mae or Dakota Asset or Caliber or Home Loans. And a lot of times I can just call these people up and, hey, go speak to this guy. He's the one you need to speak to. Even if he's not covering your area, he'll get you connected to the right person. But a lot of it's just doing groundwork on LinkedIn. If you find a bank, you put asset manager in as the job title. Most of them have that as their job title, asset manager. And you can research them that way. You can also use Facebook. And that's great, especially for once you've gotten assigned an asset, because then you can show how you're marketing. People still check those things. But yeah, it's a lot of legwork just to make the contacts. But once you've signed up for these different portals, and I spend about $3,500 to $4,000 a year just to be signed up to have the chance of getting an assignment. There's no guarantee once you sign up for a portal that you're going to get a property. So you may spend $700 on ResNet, $400 on Equator, another $700 on Pyramid, $2,200 on Zome, which does all the Mr. Cooper, Nation Star, Solution Star properties. You may never get a property. So, basically it's once you've gone through the legwork of getting signed up, which does take some time, and you to do the legwork of finding these people on LinkedIn, what you need to actually do is, once you find someone, even if it's not the asset manager at the company that you're looking for that covers South Carolina, maybe they cover California, you just got to go out there. It's just like making calls to leads. You just got to go out there and make a call, introduce yourself. I'm trying to find the asset manager, or I was told by this person that you were the asset manager for Charleston, South Carolina. They go, no, I'm not. I mean, they're usually pretty forthright. And then, can you put me through to them? But before you transfer me over, can you give me their direct extension so that in case we get disconnected along the way, I have a way to get back to them directly and I don't have to go back again through you. And they're usually pretty good about that. But it's just like anything else. You have to foster that relationship. I have 2 hours every Wednesday I call asset managers. So I have a list of people that I want to reach out to, and I try to make contact with the ones that I have the best shot at property-wise once a month, because it's quick that they forget. It's quick. In that business, a lot of asset managers change companies. A lot of asset managers get launched. A lot of departments get shrunk. I don't see that happening now. I think they're going to start to build back up. But over the last couple of years, it went from a very, very bloated part of infrastructure within the REO business to a very small, used to have 8 Fannie Mae agents that handled the Charleston Tri-County area. Now there's only 1.
So, and I agree with that. Back in the day, back in 2008, 9, 10, number one, none of those sites started charging until about 11 or 12. There were, the only thing you had was ResNet. Let me just catch everybody up to date. So you want to get on Google, you want to Google Asset Manager, Bank Asset Manager, dig in deep. You got to do a lot of research. I know when I did it, I probably had touched 75, 80 different people back then. And you got to keep talking. You got to be purposeful. Brian, I heard you say you were purposeful. You did it 2 hours every Wednesday while you were doing your other business, which is great. Question from Stephanie was, if you don't have experience, what's the best way to get started? And it's like anything else, the cart before the horse. You have to contact these people. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, you do. So,
don't spend the money until you do.
When I first got in the business, I worked for Gibbs Realty, who I think he's got eight offices around South Carolina, Georgia, and North Carolina, and they just do one thing. They do bank-owned foreclosures, and that is it. I had a very limited view of the business, and basically his motto is never turn down an assignment and do every BPO you can. And we'll go into what a BPO is in a second.
What's a BPO?
So if you've ever, you guys have all seen appraisals. BPO is basically the real estate agent version of an appraisal. An appraisal typically looks at sold inventory and they create a report. We use a form that's very similar, but we're looking at sold properties and we're looking at currently active properties. So when we do a report, they request 3 active properties and 3 properties that have closed in the last 6 months. They have very tight tolerances, 20% up, 20% down on square footage, no more than 10 years newer, no more than 10 years older. When you're picking out your comparable properties.
What's the purpose of the BPO?
When you do get an assignment, you will be doing a BPO and you don't get paid for those, but you can do BPOs as a paid way to make money when you're first getting started. So there's a lot of different BPO companies that you can sign up for. They're free. Usually BPO companies, they just want you to be in their system. So what'll happen is they'll send an email out to an order. They'll broadcast it out to 60 agents that cover a zip code, and the first one that gets there gets the order. And they range from anywhere from, I've seen them as low as about $35 for a BPO and as much as $150 on an interior BPO. And a lot of times when you're doing paid for BPOs, they typically, exteriors pay less, interiors are a little bit more. There's a little bit more to jump through to get inside a property. They're typically, if it's an interior, 99 out of 100 times it's a vacant property that's already been assigned to an agent locally to handle it, the disposition of the property for the asset management company, and you're giving what they call a second opinion. So BPO form is very similar to an appraisal. You have, photos, we use the same classifications, C1, Q1, Q2, Q3 for quality and for conditions. So it's very similar to what an appraiser does. We just don't get paid nearly as much when we do them as a paid for BPO. And the goal is to be doing them for free because that means you probably have an assignment that's going to have a closing at some time down the line.
Correct. The broker price opinion, and Stephanie's asking another question. Would you say it's a good way to market yourself? From experience, yes, the answer is yes. It shows that you have more experience. If you can go back to the asset manager in a company that actually gives the properties, manages the properties when they're under foreclosure, you will, and Brian, tell me if I'm wrong, they will look at that experience, correct, Brian?
Oh, yeah, they will. So a lot of times when we're reaching out to asset managers, I have a specific marketing piece that I send as an introduction piece. I have something that's laminated that I send out directly to them in the mail once I've made contact with them. And then I have something that I send it in just a PDF form. And if you're new to the business and you don't have a lot to fill in your resume, you can say that you've done 35 BPOs for Consolidated Analytics or for a million different asset management companies. BPO companies. It's a good way to at least get your foot in the door and have something to talk about. When I first got, and I was getting towards this and I got distracted and kind of went a different direction, but I was getting towards this beforehand. The philosophy that I got into the business with when I was at Gibbs Realty was he was always big on doing BPOs because he felt that what happens is when you get that second opinion out there, that second opinion to someone who's already been assigned to the property, that's a good way to get into the door because your name, your company, your information is going to be on that second opinion. So, on that, if you're ever doing a paid for BPO and the agent, especially if you're doing an interior BPO, you can kind of backtrack and trace what company that is, and you may be able to figure out what that asset manager is. So if that property's been aged, and especially in this market, if it goes more than 60 days, they were way off the mark initially. Either on their value or what the appraiser put on. Sometimes we get handcuffed as listing agents for asset management companies and that we come up with a value of 200, but that appraiser said it was worth 250 and we listed at 245 and we're stuck. And we're just so far away from a real offer that an asset manager is willing to even accept or even counter sometimes that, there was something wrong right off the bat. But if you've been the person that's done that backup BPO and it's in the system and you reach out to them and you offer and you do actually get to that right asset manager and tell them that you're interested in doing whatever you can to help him move assets in the area, he needs a free BPO or a free second opinion, that you're willing to go out there, snap photos. There's a lot of, I don't want to say shadiness in this business. There used to be, especially during 2009, 10, 11, 12, agents that didn't go out to properties. They would just go to the property once, take 13 different sets of photos and use one set for this week because we have weekly inspections, use the next set for the next week, use the next set for the week after. Lo and behold, the next door neighbor stole the AC unit. Kids broke in through the back window and lit a fire in the kitchen. And you haven't been there in weeks, and they have a property preservation company that goes out and also does checks. And now you've been loading up all these photos, and they may not catch it, but at some point it does catch up. And then the minute you've done that, you're never going to get a property. Your company's never going to get a property, and you're dead to them. And these people have long memories because they move from company to company. And if you leave a bad taste in their mouth, it gets around.
They're going to know you at the end of the day. So, and I appreciate that. And we've all seen it. You get to there and you do the BPO, say there's no air conditioner. So moving on to the, so we've talked to the BPO, we've talked to the asset manager. Let's talk about costs. Now you did start saying what the platforms were, and just a brief explanation of the platform is this is where you input all your data. This is where you input your workflow, right? And back in the day, as I said, it didn't cost us anything. Let's talk about the hard costs that you assume as an REO bank-owned listing agent. What are some of the harder costs you assume?
So basically, I'll go just into the workflow and then I'll go into the cost. So when you get assigned a property
workflow, I'm trying to get these folks the information to get there so they can do the workflow.
Right. Well, I'm just going to go into it briefly. So what happens is when you get a property assigned, let's just say it's on Equator, you have 24 hours to do an occupancy check. If the property is vacant, you have a short period of time to get the utilities turned on in your company name. So yes, you're going to be having carrying costs. It's not as simple as they sign you a property and you go and get it listed and then it's sold. You're going to have carrying costs. Now, most of the larger companies do help you out with some of that, but sometimes it's a smaller company. Like I'm dealing with one in Mount Pleasant that I actually had a call with this morning, and I think I might be getting it reassigned. It's a smaller asset management company in New York. They have an REO in Mount Pleasant that's just a train wreck. It's been on the market for the better part of a year, but it's a small asset management company. So I would be responsible with them. If it was a new assignment, I would be responsible for covering the rekey of the property, which is anywhere between 50 to could be a couple $100 if the house has 10 sets of double doors. So basically when you get assigned the property, they want to make sure that no one has access to it. So you have to rekey every access point of the home. The next thing they want you to do is, especially if it's in the winter, they want to have it winterized if it's vacant. Because they don't want to have any water in the pipes and have something burst and then be dealing with a much larger problem. So then you need to get a contractor or a plumber out there to winterize the home, which is pressurizing the lines so that with air so that there isn't any chance for a leak. Then the next thing you need to do is get bids for what we call a trash out and a sales clean. And there's some horror stories I could tell you some horror stories of properties that I've been assigned that have had 160 cubic yards of crap inside them, feces, dead animals. I mean, if you can imagine the worst of the worst, bed bugs. Every March, I'm definitely walking into 3 or 4 houses that month with fleas. It seems to be the month that fleas decide to come out. These are some of the things you'll have to take on. And then there's also the sales clean. And then if there's any emergency out at the property, someone breaks in, you need to get a contractor out there to bid and do an emergency bid for boarding a window. Or they now use something else called clear coating, which is basically a plexiglass system that Fannie Mae uses for broken windows. Or someone's kicked in the door, and that happens a lot. Someone's stolen the AC unit. You're going and getting a police report, and you're meeting the police officer out there. So you're sitting there for 2 hours while they're getting a report. You have power on at the property and it's got an alarm, and the alarm doesn't go off for 3 weeks, but then all of a sudden at 4 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning, you're getting a call from a pissed off next door neighbor because the alarm decided to go off, and you're sitting there inside the house trying to figure out which breaker to turn off to get that alarm off. So there's a lot more to it than just getting an assignment and then moving on to getting it closed. There's the holding and carrying costs. And then there's the other process of each one of these banks has a master listing agreement that they send out to you. And as soon as they send you the assignment, you have to DocuSign. And they all handle their invoices differently. Some companies are great about paying you back. When you're dealing with the Fannie Mae's and some of the larger ones, most of them pay between 15 and 30 days. But when you start to get to these smaller companies, you may be net 60, net 90 days. If you have 5 or 6 or 7 properties, and a lot of these utility companies require deposits, especially when you're new into the business. Right now, I have over $1,000 just with SC&G Dominion for just deposits that just because I was new when I changed companies and I had to put it into a different LLC name. So there's a lot of money you're going to have tied up. It's not for the faint of heart. I can help you, direct you, and give you better choices, maybe a roadmap to go after certain types of clients first that may have lower costs or have a lower chance for lower carrying costs. But it is a risk. And if you don't follow their timelines, you miss getting that last electric bill in within 30 days of the close date. You're SOL. You're shit out of luck. That $173, you're out.
Yep.
So, I'm pretty good about that stuff. I'm anal, and I have a lot of things that I have set up in my QuickBooks for reminders. And, I have sheets that give me cheat sheets that I know I have to have certain things by certain days. But I recover about 98% of my money, and I'm good at it. not everyone is. When I was at Gibbs, they said they had about a 16% loss ratio on expenses. And
Crazy.
the one last expense that they could ask you to front, less and less are doing it. More times than not, they are putting together a draw for, let's just say the asset management companies decided a marketing plan that they want to rehab a property. You know, you've done your BPO, you think that, you know, it's a home in Westcott that just had really crappy renters, and it's mostly aesthetics, but it still works out to $15,000 or $18,000. They, when you took that assignment, you've agreed to cover it. At least most companies have at least $10,000 minimum carrying costs and expenses. You may be requested to front $10,000 up front towards that repair, and hope that for some strange reason that the asset management company doesn't screw you out of that money.
True, so true, so true. And I've lost a few deposits over my lifetime. It's not hard to do. Sounds like there's a lot of work involved there. In your opinion, and then I want to get into the buyer side of this, okay? What's the ramp up time from, hey, if I start taking BPOs tomorrow for things like CoreLogic and Goodman Dean and people like that, what's the ramp up time from there until I actually start getting some assets from the people? Is it more about me, or is it more about, because you said about the conversations, you said you went to STAR, you've been to, you know, NRABR, whatever they call that now. Does it benefit me to belong to STAR? Does it benefit me to belong to the National Association?
So, I mean, it used to be, I mean, I don't belong to NRBA. They have about a $2,000 a year $2,000 sign on, and then they have a monthly that you'd have to pay to be involved. And it's a great association if you're in it. Most people that have been in have been doing this business 15, 20, 30 years. 5-Star is just the conference. They used to have a membership group that kind of went defunct when the business took a downturn, and a lot of what they were hoping to do kind of fell. You know, they were really getting that stuff going in 2014, 15, 16, and then the business just contracted so much. I mean, right now there are currently only, as of this morning, 17 foreclosures actively on the market on our MLS. So only 28 under contract.
Yeah, this wouldn't, if you aren't already there, would you say this would be a great pillar to base your business on going forward if you were a new agent?
Well, if you're a new agent, I wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. You know, and I think when you're a new agent, you want to have different avenues to lead generate, to create new business. You know, if you're thinking this is going to be one branch and that's something that you can dedicate a certain amount of time a week to building that part of your business, I think it's a great plan. I think now would actually be the time to get into it, because there is a lot of legwork. It's not like you said, if you did a BPO, when do you follow up? Well, you know, if you've done a BPO on a property, there's no guarantee. One, there's no guarantee the asset manager is actually ever going to look at that BPO. Right. He may have a portal where someone has just entered your value into the system. But if you have, you know, the gumption to go make those phone calls, and you find out the actual asset manager on a property locally, and you've hunted him down, and you're trying to break that you're having that conversation. And I say, don't make any of these conversations unless you're already signed up on those platforms, because let's say you actually have a good conversation and he wants to transfer the property over to you and you're not signed up. Well, now you're going to have egg on your face. So, right. But you know, right now would be the time to start doing those BPOs, even if you only decide to accept 1 or 2 assignments a week, because one is, it's going to be a learning experience. You're going to get them kicked back for something not being in. So when you do a BPO, 90% of them now are reviewed by a computer system that has an algorithm that checks within your values, and there's going to be things that don't fit in every value. You're not going to be doing BPOs on a home in Westcott, and you're going to have perfect comps all the time. Sometimes it's out in the middle of nowhere, and you really got to stretch your distances, stretch your square footage, your age. You got to do a lot to figure out a good comparable property, and it's just not going to fit in the algorithm. So it's going to get kicked back to you, and you're going to have to spend another 30 minutes on it. Then you're going to have to spend another hour on it. And then you're just going to be frustrated and be like, why did I even accept this order? So if you do ever go down the route of going for a BPO, always look the address up first. Make sure it's something you think you can do right off the bat. You know, get it in a subdivision like Cane Bay or Carolina Park or Westcott or Shadow Moss, or, you know, somewhere where you're going to be able to find comps. And then you start building it up. And once you've done 10 or 15 of those, maybe it takes you 2 months to get there. That's when you can start to think about, that's when I would be changing my focus from just doing some BPOs to researching the asset management companies and the banks that work in the area. And then I would think about, you know, at that point, once you've figured out who that hot sheet of maybe the top 5 or 10 that are doing business in your area, and you've gone on to LinkedIn, you've gone on to Facebook and tried to figure out who these people are, and you have a couple avenues to make some phone calls. That's when I would think about, and there are different REO groups on LinkedIn. There's different REO groups on Facebook. I would join as many of them as possible. The dialogue there is great. A lot of times they share contacts and they share people. They share phone numbers and email addresses. They also tell you, you know, you may find that something's serviced by Face Servicing, but you're not sure what platform you need them on. So you can find a lot of that information in those different groups on Facebook and LinkedIn. So
Cool.
I would join those immediately. Join those in any Facebook or LinkedIn group, join them immediately. And then once you've gotten to the point of figuring out who a couple of these people are and which platforms they're on, I wouldn't go and add the whole kit and caboodle at one time. I would go to the one that you think you can get your foot in the door, the one you think you can make it and make a small investment there. So maybe it's the $700 that you're spending on ResNet. Maybe it's the $400 on Equator. Maybe it's the $700 on Pyramid. I wouldn't be getting them all at one time. I would just go with one.
Okay, cool. And that's some sage advice right there. Don't spend your money before you know that you actually have the ability to get those properties. I want to switch up into, you know, buyers. A lot of agents here are on the buyer side of it. And, you know, they tell me, you see it, here's the foreclosure, there's a 14-day waiting period. I don't think we have to go into all that stuff. What is the best practice when I see something that's a foreclosure and my guy wants to buy it? Talk to me about low bidding, net to the asset managers, net to the owners. Let's talk about that. Talk to me about, we got the property, my client wants to make an offer, and because it's a foreclosure, they think they're going to get it for 60 cents on the dollar, which doesn't happen anymore. We had this conversation a little bit yesterday about the values going up. What are some of the best practices? How can I win that property for my client?
So, you know, people think foreclosure, they think REO, bank owned, they think it's going to be a deal. You know, they think it's 2010, 11, 12 again. And at that time, there were ways to get properties at 60 cents on the dollar. You know, banks were they had already written off that money on that quarter. They had already figured we're taking a loss on it. We have, you know, asset managers at that time. You know, typically when you deal with an asset manager, they have somewhere between 100 and 200 assets they're managing in their portfolio. But during that time, they may have had 500, 600. I mean, I had a couple asset managers that were managing 800 properties a month at any time. I mean, that's just a ridiculous. And so when you would call them and ask them about a property and you give them the street address, they'd be like, give me the property site key, give me the key number, give me the account number, give me the bank loan number. They didn't want to know a property address. You know, they didn't want to talk to me because they had such short amount of time that they needed to move on to the next thing because they would have 60 voicemails in the morning. So, you know, realistically, if you can get somewhere between 10 and 15% off of real value, you've done a phenomenal job for your client. So banks have gone through the process. These asset management companies, like I said, they've gone through and they've had an appraisal completed. They've had a BPO done by the agent they've signed. They've had a BPO completed by another agent that, you know, did the paid for BPO. They've gotten 3 opinions from real estate professionals to tell them what it's worth. Why are they going to take an offer that's 60 grand below what it's currently listed at? Why are they going to even counter or entertain an offer like that? Basically, it's an insult to the time that asset manager has, because now if he does counter it, and if he does counter it, he's going to count, if the property's listed for 199.9, he's going to counter at 199.5, and just to piss you off. And you know, then there's going to be another round, and you're going to come up $5,000 thinking you've done something amazing, and he's just going to outright reject it. He's like, all right, well, I had fun for 5 minutes. I don't have time to spend on it. And then your client's contacting going, well, why didn't we get a counter? Your best bet, first thing is have a clean contract. Don't have a lot, so when you deal with these banks, they all have their own contracts. Fannie Mae's got a contract, HUD's got a contract, VA's got a contract, Bank of America's got a contract. They're anywhere from some of the smaller banks as short as 4 or 5 page addendums to the contract to as much as 30 pages. Don't try to rewrite law. They're not going to agree to any of it. And their contract, every single one of them has a clause somewhere towards the back of the contract, usually on the second to last or the third to last page after the signing page, that basically states that their contract supersedes the South Carolina contract. That anything you write in, any sort of contingency or addendum that you write is going to be superseded by their contract. The only way that you can get that written into the actual offer on the property is to write it in their comment section, and they're just not going to sign it if it makes no sense to them. So it's very difficult to get something that may make sense to you but does not make sense to a bank. So like I said, clean contracts. Seller, they don't want to pay for CL100s. They don't want to pay for home warranties. They don't want to pay for closing costs. They will, but you need to structure the offer knowing that if you're asking for $5,000 in seller assistance, you're taking that out of the seller net. So you need to work the deal backwards, back to what the sellers, from the seller net that you think the seller has a chance of accepting, and working the offer back the other direction to come up with a number that your buyer is going to be able to submit to that seller. So, on average, typically bank owned right now are only doing about 8% below market value. So, and I think that number may, even be even less. I haven't done, that was last year's number. I haven't done the numbers this year. So, I mean, it's not like it's a huge deal. I mean, you're talking about a $200,000 property that you're getting for around 185. And that's a good deal. It's those people who offer 120 that it's a waste of time to the agent. The agent gets pissed off because more than likely, if he's got one investor offer at 120, he's got 5 investor offers at 120. And then he's got 2.
That's a real good point.
And then he's got 2 offers from people that are looking to buy a property and they're using financing, and they're much better offers. And to be perfectly honest, I've seen asset managers bite their nose to spite their face for $1,000 difference on an offer. I had a cash offer on just an atrocious property. I knew it had all sorts of issues. And the bank held on for someone doing an FHA 203K, only to find out 9 weeks later that it had no shot, that the people, and so we wasted 9 weeks. The property sat longer, and that investor that was ready to close in 10 days at $1,000 less on a $175,000 property, they've put their money somewhere else. So, be very thoughtful. If you have any questions ever about an addendum, about how to structure an offer, what bank I think an MLS is, I know all that. So feel free to always call me. I can usually look at an MLS, look at the agent that's got it listed, and I can tell you exactly who, what bank, what asset management company, what GSE has it, which GSE is just a government entity like Fannie Mae, Freddie, VA, USDA, Ginnie Mae, at one of the penny max. You can usually figure out who it is holding that property just by the language and the agent that's got it listed.
Cool. I appreciate that. What's your biggest challenge?
Just being purposeful and making my phone calls to asset managers.
Yeah. So you're doing the same thing. I mean, pretty much, if I'm looking for property, I'm calling people. If you're looking for property, you're calling asset managers. So being purposeful, that's fantastic.
My biggest thing is because of the downturn, the last couple of years, we went from having, the foreclosure list that I kept, and I keep it updated every morning on from the hot sheet. So I go through the entire hot sheet. I look for my players that I know have the chance for an assignment, and I go and I update the MLS numbers, and I keep it active, and I keep it contingent. I remove the sold ones off the contingents, move the back of the markets back on the active list, add the new properties, and I keep that list, and I keep that actually updated on my website. And then I have a list of investors that it gets sent to every day. But going back to like 2010, 11, 12, there was 140, 150 foreclosures on the market at any given time.
Page after page after page. So let me ask you, you had mentioned it earlier during the interview, and I don't know if people are aware of this or not. What's going to happen in 12 to 18 months? What are we expecting to happen? And why don't you share that with these folks for the next couple of minutes? And then I want to jump into a quick question and answer period.
Okay.
Release you so you can go back out and do some work.
So I did quote one wrong number. It wasn't 9,000 people in forbearance. It was about 5,000 people in forbearance.
5,000, that's fine.
It was 9% of all mortgages.
9%.
That's where I got the 9 from. So 9% going on almost 10% of all mortgages have applied for forbearance. That's a healthy.
Is that in our MSA? Is that just here?
That's national. That's nationally. So it's 13%.
That number's got to be bigger.
It's
got to be 4.5 million people.
Yeah, it's 13% of all Freddie Mac loans, 6% of all Fannie Mae and Ginnie Mae loans. Actually, no, it's 13% of Ginnie Mae, and it's 6% of all Fannie and Freddie loans have applied for forbearance.
That's just absolutely.
If you guys aren't familiar with the term forbearance, basically when COVID happened, banks, forbearance basically allows you to delay, but not put off or add to the end of your mortgage a certain length of mortgage payment. So when this whole crisis happened, a lot of people contacted their bank or their servicer and asked if they could have a forbearance. And basically their mortgage payments were put on hold. But there's been a lot of debate on how it's going to be handled by especially the GSEs on getting these people back up to current. If you delayed your mortgage payment 1 month or 3 months, or they've allowed people to delay their payments up to a year, typically a forbearance doesn't allow you to add those payments at the end. When month 13 comes up, you have to bring up all 13 payments at that point. People aren't going to have that money. So some people will get into modification programs, but if you were in the business the last time we went through this, the modification process was, pardon my French, a cluster. And it was very difficult for people to get their packets reviewed. Things may be better, but I don't think they've learned from their mistakes. I expect at least 30% of those people to not even apply for a modification. They're not going to know that it's even available. Some people are just too ashamed once they've done that. If you couldn't pay your mortgage, but you had car payments and you had cell phone bills and you had things you needed to do to get to work, you were more worried about getting from A to B and get back again to the grocery store. The mortgage, if you could get it delayed a year, you weren't even thinking about repaying it. You were just trying to get the rest of your life back together. And by the time it gets to the point where you need to make a decision or figure out how to do that, you may be too proud to make those calls. So
what's going to happen to these people?
They're going to get foreclosed on. They're just not going to take the steps. And so, you figure this crisis started in March. Well, March 1st, the end of the first quarter going into the second quarter, you're going to start to see these foreclosures happening. And these banks are not going to wait. They're not going to wait for people to get through the modification process to start a foreclosure. The minute they get through their required time period, especially if it's a Fannie Mae back or a Freddie Mac back property. They have to wait a certain amount of days to get through it. The second that they're eligible, they're going to start that foreclosure, even if the person's gone through 90% of the paperwork on modification. So they're going to get these foreclosures started, because if the person stops their process and doesn't go through the modification, they want to make sure that they can get this off their books as quickly as possible.
Right, they're going to protect their legal standing within their contracts. All right, we're about 10 minutes of 2 right now. We got about 10 minutes left.
There was only one more thing I was going to say to that. Now, the one thing that's majorly different between now and the last crisis is equity. People have equity this go around. So, you know, if you want to do research, a lot of people, what I would say, before you decide to go into the REO market, there may be a way that you can go after these people as a pre-foreclosure. And what I mean by that is, a pre-foreclosure is something that the Liz Pendon, the bank, has started the foreclosure process, and that information does get listed. So the easiest, you can pay services to get that information. It's, you know, it's just like buying information that you would load into your dialer system. But the way to do it on your own is to go to the individual county websites and look at the foreclosure hearings. The tax map numbers are there. Create yourself a document reaching out to these people that you can mail out, explaining to them that you want to help them out in their situation. And you never know, someone might call you on that. And I have samples, if that's something you guys want to do, that I can send your way. But then you can be going after people that would have previously been a short sale that now have equity, and they can actually get out of the house, avoid having a foreclosure on there. You're coming with contribution, because you're giving them something and a way out of that house that they didn't know they had available. And you're giving them a way to get out and avoid having a foreclosure on their credit for the next 7 years. So that is a route that many of you may want to consider, because there is a lot to get into the REO side of thing. It may be easier to get into. It doesn't take much to put a stamp on a letter and send it out to 15, 20 people that show up on a list of the master equity hearings, not the sales, the hearings that come up this month.
Cool. So thank you. And that is a good piece of information right there, because all you're doing is prospecting, right? You're prospecting for clients, just in a different way. Anybody got any questions for Brian? I know Stephanie was real interested in the BPOs. I think the BPOs are one of the best ways to start out. It gives you the opportunity to learn how to actually value a property. The master and equity list, Stephanie, that comes from the county list. Okay, normally they used to post it on the front page. Now you got to dig a little bit for it. But give a quick, how do you get into Charleston County, Brian? I mean, charleston.org. Right.
So yeah, right here, I'm gonna.
You need to share?
Yeah.
Hold on. Go ahead, try to share it. Little green button, there you go.
So I have on my bar here. So I have the Charleston. So not all of them are direct lists anymore. Some of them are, but charlestoncounty.org foreclosure. This was the list that went through that they already have out for next month. These are the next month sales. And so they've already started posting for August. But these are the properties that will be foreclosed on. You're seeing a lot of master associations at this point. If people aren't paying their HOA, like this person's $16,000 in the arrears with late fees. So it's not a primary lien. It's subject to the primary liens, but
it's not you want to go after.
Yeah, that's not someone you want to go after. But this is where you would find it. Stephanie, I'll send you the links. I have them all right here, but a lot of them will bring you to like Dorchester County. You're basically going into their court system, and when you look, and let me just do a quick refresh, because it never works on the first one. You always got to refresh. It's not popping up, but it'll be a list of. Here we go. You have to accept and to go into their court system. And this is actually where I was mentioning where you could also find the pre-foreclosure stuff. Are you guys seeing all this? It's
Yeah.
going slow, but that's because I got a million bars up. But this is where you would actually do your research for a specific, oh, they actually pulled their master and equity stuff. Let me see, that page.
How about list pendants? Can
Yeah,
you go
this is
to-
where you would do your research. So like if you went to and you actually wanted to research a specific tax map number to find out where it is in that, that's where you would put it. But like right here, if we went to court search, oh, I didn't want courts. That's why I wanted their MIE. Okay, this is actually what I wanted, the court roster. Not my website. But this is where you would actually go. And unfortunately, when you're in a Zoom meeting, it slows everything else down when you're trying to share stuff on the web, on the World Wide Web. But basically, this is what their court roster looks like. So you accept when you get to the main screen, and this is where they'll list all the types of hearings that they're having, and then when they are also having their master and equity sale. And this is where you would go to find for Dorchester and Berkeley County. They look almost identical, but I can share those links with you. But it's going to be a list of the different dates, and you just click on the hyperlink on the right side when it pops up. So you'll have master's hearings. This is where I would do the pre-foreclosure work. They don't have their sales listed yet because they just had their sale earlier this week. So they haven't posted the date of what they're doing in August yet, but there'll be a link somewhere around here in a couple days that shows up for their master and equity sales. But that pre-foreclosure link I was telling you about to research, that would be this one here. I would click on, and these are the people that I would be sending that letter out to. There's not a lot of them currently because a lot of foreclosure and evictions are on hold, but these would be the people I would be prospecting and sending out a letter to.
All right, we're coming to the end.
I'm going to stop the share.
I thank you for all your information. There's a lot of people there that have questions and have answers. Stephanie, Sarah, reach out to Brian. Reach out to Brian direct. I'm more than happy to help. I'm sure he'll set up a time to talk to you. Brian, what's your telephone number real quick?
Yeah, it's 843-628-8910.
There you go. All right, Brian, I appreciate you. You're a man of too much knowledge. We've got on for another 3 hours.
Easily.
I think the overall at the bottom line here is it's a specialty market. You've got to have education. You've got to learn before you earn. And hopefully this little segment has shortened that learning curve for quite a few people. It's a great market if you know what you're doing, as you've proven. So thanks again. Anybody got any other questions? All right, we're out of here. If you need me, drop by every Tuesday, 11 o'clock. We have an open hour. You're welcome to drop by and ask me any questions you like. Brian, thank you again, buddy.
My pleasure.
Thank you.